the completion of the Civil War, the United States military was basically involved in the frontier action, and so there was really no need for sniper rifles, and the skill sort of went away. What you do have is civilian scouts attached to the military at places like Adobe Wells, where they were using their buffalo guns at long range to keep the natives far, far away, you know, knocking out some war chief with his complete bonnet at 1,000 yards.
Springfield Arsenal did actually make 201 marksmen's rifles. They had a faster twist with more grooves, and they tried that because they were trying to compete in some of the competitions, and they were getting killed with the sharpshooter Remington. So they did make 201 of those in 1881, and they actually went from the 405 grain bullet because they found after 500 yards it didn't stabilize. That's when they went to the 500 grain bullet in 1881. It's much more stable out to 1,000 yards. So they did try it, and it was not a 45-70. They made it a 45-80. And the cartridge alone is very rare. I have one of those. I think that's one in 50 years I found. But they did try to do something, but they did encourage marksmanship, and they did encourage long-range shooting, but the service rifle really did not do real well at those distances.
In the Spanish-American War, there's no report of really sniping. Now, around 1915, we're going to get to World War I. What happened was, during the Mexican expedition, there was an interest in sniping or long-range shooting, and we're going to find one of the problems we're going to run into with dealing with the Army versus the Marine Corps. The Army's attitude towards sniping almost was, you take a service rifle, put a scope on it, find the best shooter in your platoon, give him the gun, he's now the sniper. Okay? And before the First World War, the best optics were in Germany. So in 1914, you couldn't get optics from Germany. And there really wasn't much available in the United States. The two biggest that I could find was the Winchester A5 scope and the Warner and Swasey. Now, the Warner and Swasey, the Canadians used them. They put them on their Ross rifles and used them as sniping rifles. The Americans also went to the Warner and Swasey because it met their requirement that the rifle still be loaded with a clip. They insisted that the rifle still had to be able to take a stripper clip. And they put this prismatic Warner and Swasey scope on it with the big rubber eyepiece. And one of the things they found early is when you fired this, the rubber eyepiece tended to stick to your face and didn't want to come off. So that definitely presented a problem. So they started to drill holes in them so the air would let out. But I've got pictures of guys in the First World War who took pocket knives and just carved a lot of this away and threw it away. All right? There's a picture of American snipers in the First World War training in England, and there's like 6 of them. It's a black and white film, and it's used a lot on the History Channel and others. And it shows guys in ghillie suits going around with Warner and Swasey sniper rifles. Now, there's very little information on American sniping in the First World War. Because when the time we really got there in 1918, it was starting to become a war of movement. We were getting out of the trenches and advancing onto German territory. So there's very little, again, knowledge from the First World War. The best example was the Marines at Belleau Wood. One of them had an 03 Springfield with the Winchester, which is a long A5 scope, firing at like 1,200 yards at the Germans and getting hits. Whether they were kills, I don't know, but he was getting hits. And the French were amazed because some of the Marines using iron sights at 1,000 yards were getting hits. And they were like, you know, these Americans can really shoot. Now, the problem with these is they're 100 years old. A lot of them, the insides are flaking off. I'm afraid if I even fire one shot, it's going to go crazy. The other thing is most of them were mounted in 1915, 1916, early 17 on what we now call low-number Springfields, like this one. All right, so now comes the other question. Do you really want to shoot this thing and mess up the scope and maybe the rifle? Its visibility was very poor. American optics left a lot to be desired. All right, but this was the sniper rifle for the First World War. All right, now when the war ends, Sniping is just forgotten about, except that the only source of information we have is a book that I read many years ago in the library, and I can't find copies, but every now and then it might pop up at a gun show. It's called A Rifleman Goes to War. McBride. That's the book to get. A Rifleman Goes to War, McBride. He was a shooter at Camp Perry. He was in the, I think, Indiana National Guard. When the war broke out, he moves to Canada, joins the Canadian Army, is given some kind of a rear echelon job, resigns his commission, becomes a private in a unit going overseas, and in no time at all, he's running the sniper program for the Canadians. Because he knew long-range shooting. Yes?
The NRA book thing, I subscribed to it, and they published this book. If anybody really wants to read it, I'll go find it and loan it to you.
Yeah.
I was just in Nashville for the NRA annual session, and Major John Plaster
Yes.
gave a lecture. It was called Sniping in the Great War, and his book is coming out about that in a few months. So he's going to answer.
Right, he's going to have a lot of stuff there.
Information. It was an amazing lecture.
Yes.
And what power is that scope?
About 2 power. I think it's 2.2.
The Winchester's a 5 power.
5 power?
Yeah.
The 8.5, 5
I
power.
have one.
Oh, okay.
I have one of those, and then I have, when Lyman bought out Winchester and Stevens, they started to manufacture their own scopes. The first scope that they came out with was the 5A, which was just basically a transition
Right.
from the from the A5 to the 5A, and it's almost the same scope,
Right.
but it's 5 power.
Yes.
Actually, McBride, when it started out, running a machine gun site.
Mm-hmm.
The M&G.
Emma G's, his other book.
He got so mad at some of the German snipers that he started sniping back at them with 303 and started doing very well. The second thing is, Springfield Armory came out in 1927 with an international match rifle. And that had a Lyman rear sight, I forget what number, it's a 48 sight, had a Winchester front sight, very heavy barrel, and they also made a 5 scope. Reading the results, 25 rounds since they been tested in this 1927 international match, they would shoot a 2 1/4 inch group at 300 yards. So that's less than one.
Right, there was a lot of research occurring in the First World War. They were thinking of mounting Winchester 8.5s on 1917 Enfields, everything else. And because the real push was America and the Allies, the big push was going to be the spring of 1919. That was going to end the war. When the war ended in November of 1918, it was like, surprise! But they were, they had anticipated fighting the war in the spring of 1919 and getting all the equipment and weapons and everything else that they needed for that one last push into Germany, and the war ended in November. Now, World War II comes along, and the Brophy book on the Springfield is the book. Nice and thick, it is the definitive work. And as he puts it, the 03A4 was a poor excuse for a sniper rifle. What happened was, in January of 1943, the Army went to Remington and said, we need sniper rifles. We need 20,000 of them. And the solution was not, let's go hand-pick certain firearms, let's glass bed the actions. They basically took a serial number block, took 03A3s that hadn't even been numbered or serial numbered yet, looked around, found the Lyman mount and the Redfield scope that was available. Not because it was great, because it was available and could be produced in numbers. And on the back table there, Joe's got an 03A4 that is set up the way it was for the Second World War. They eliminated the requirement for stripper clips. They said, that's okay, you can stick individual rounds. But this is a temporary solution. The goal is going to be to make an M1 Garand sniper, because again, we want to take the service rifle, put a scope on it, tell you, give it to the best shot in your unit, sniper training completed. Okay? Now, the 03A4 lasted a long time. Now, I was an assistant company armorer in 1971 at Fort Hood, and we got this package of manuals. And I'm going through it, and here's a manual, a technical manual, December 1970, on the 03A4. which of course we don't have. We're regular Army. We got M16s, you know. So of course I kept them booking it somewhere up my attic. But anyway, what they did was as late as the 1970s, the 03A4 was still in the system, except now it had an M84 scope. Now the early 03A4, some of them had 2-groove barrels. This one has a Smith Corona barrel in it. So somewhere along the line it got rebuilt, and somebody had the good sense to take off the 2-groove barrel and put in a 4-groove. If you were really smart, you found a Smith Corona 6-groove, and they put the M84 scope on it. When you look at Joe's display, you'll see what the original scope was. You can buy a better scope for $50 at Target than what they got at that time. The situation of optics in America was so bad that the Warner and Swasey scope cost 3 times the price of the rifle. Okay? It cost 3 times the price of a Springfield rifle to put the Warner and Swasey scope on it. Yes?
Well, the interesting thing about the Smith Corona barrels, they were all made by
High standard.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, this was supposed to be a temporary solution. The next step was to develop an M1 sniper. Now, the sniper that Joe has on his table is an M1C, similar to this one, which is an MC1, which I'll let him talk about. The thing was, they wanted something that could be mounted into the receiver. And they did all kinds of experiments, and they were having troubles with it. So they went and said, well, let's play it safe and make another design, and that was the M1D design, which is a barrel with a scope mount. And the M1C, the serial number range, there's a whole bunch of things. This is an original M1C set up with a Marine Corps Kollmorgen scope, which Joe can talk about. The thing is, you have to load the M1 from the top. So you can't put the scope in line with the sights. So you got to offset it. Well, when you offset it, now you got to strain your neck to shoot it. So they solved that problem by putting in a cheek pad. So now you can position it where it belongs, okay? But then it's not good when you want to use the iron sights. That was a trade-off. The M1C got a little bit of use in World War II, really Korea. The 03A4, because it was available, is really your World War II sniping rifle with the thinner scope. And to some extent, Korea, okay? But again, the Army wasn't training snipers, it was issuing scoped rifles. And they put in what they called the flash hider, which they later found actually detracted from accuracy. You were better off taking it off until they developed what's called a T-37, which is a prong-type flash hider. But in the beginning, if you look at all the pictures, you will see the cone, like on this rifle. Now, as late as 1980, I was at Camp Dawson, West Virginia, and we had to use a certain room for a classroom, and I'm in there rummaging around, and I find all these charts on the M1D sniper. And this is 1980s. So they were still somewhere in the system, possibly the National Guard, or the unit that was training in those rooms was a Special Forces unit. And I do know that they had a stock number that if you were behind enemy lines, you would radio in a certain stock number and they would drop you a box with 2 M1D rifles for, you know, training the locals or for your use. Early Vietnam, M1Ds were still being used. Marines also used them in the Dominican Republic in 1965 because of the lack of anything else. That was the problem, the lack of anything else. A lot of these rifles got used much, much longer. Somewhere in New Jersey, these theoretically existed also. I was in the 50th MP Company, and there was a mobilization chart. First group called up was state headquarters, then came division headquarters, then came my unit, okay? And we went to a workshop on intelligence procedures during a civil disturbance, and one of the questions was counter-sniping. And the answer was you use your marksmanship unit. We asked around, we have a marksmanship unit. What are the rules of engagement? We don't know. And when can they shoot? We don't know. What do they have? They have national match rifles, don't they? Yes. Do they have any sniper rifles? We don't know. it was just half-assed. Half-assed, I'm sorry, I'm watching commercials. It was half-assed. But we'll get into that later on. Yes?
Did the German Mauser bolt-action rifle have offset scope also?
I'm not even gonna get into German, I'm out of my area of expertise, okay? I'm not even gonna venture a guess, okay? The M1Ds, finally the government started getting rid of them, I think in the 1990s through the CMP program. I put in my name, I didn't win the lottery. Angus did. I know Angus got an 0384, I think it was.
No, I got a M1D.
M1D, and that's the best. If you won that lottery, you got it right from the government. You got the bill of sale. It's got its instant provenance. Because the trouble with an M1D is you can put it on any M1 and it immediately becomes a D model. Okay? An M1C or an MC1, it's a special serial number range. So again, they're more desirable from the collector point of view. From shooting, this 0384 with the Smith Corona barrel, all I know is one time I went to a range in Pennsylvania and I put up soda cans at 100 yards and I was using ball ammo, not even match ammo. Each time, boom, boom, boom. So it was good for that purpose. All right, Joe, you want to pop up here? Maybe you and Dave, whatever, talk about. Yeah, Marine Corps was a little different in World War II.
And they tested it initially with match grade ammo, and they were getting, I think, 2.5-inch groupings at 600 yards. I think Andy would even approve of shooting like that. So they immediately adopted it. And they mounted them on 03A1 national match rifles.